And we are live. It is Tuesday, December 28th, 2021, 5:01 p.m. It is a Shoebill shirt day, a matter that I'm sure we will get to. But before we introduce our guest or discuss Corvids or Shoebills or anything else, Kate and I have a significant administrative announcement related to the future of the show, which is to take effect less than a week from now, as of January 3rd, I guess, which will be the new the first show day of the year. We have decided to scale back to 3 days a week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because the current pace as we both get back into teaching in the spring is actually unsustainable.
It might kill us.
It might actually kill us. So we have decided to do the shows 3 days a week, and to work on recruiting new co-hosts. We have some in the works. And as we recruit new co-hosts who want to take on new days, we may bring back Tuesday and Thursday. We may not. In addition, so we will be giving you the schedule of who's doing what days as we get a little closer to the actual event. In addition, I just want you all to know that the audio version of In Lieu of Fun, I have now committed to posting daily at 9 o'clock in the morning the previous day's episodes. I have integrated into it, as of today, the theme song by the estimable Ducks with Pants. So it's all so professional sounding. And every day, the previous day's show will be there. I'm going to ask you to go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show, because we really have no promotional activity for it other than you guys, and also to tweet episodes of the show, the audio versions that you particularly enjoyed, because we're going to try to build the audience. Use that to build audience, to get people in here, all of which is a long way of saying we are not allowed to have fun anymore. And as we approach the end of year 2 of In Lieu of Fun, we're really not allowed to have fun anymore. But it is great to welcome back Carl Bergstrom, who was on the show in the first year. You were our first Corvid, not COVID guest. And
you recommended to us the amazing Kaylee Swift.
Right. So welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's hard to believe that it's been well over a year, and et cetera, et cetera. And that
it's so nice to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you as well, and fun to be here. And so on.
But before we get into the Shoebill, then I don't know if we've told Carl about my cormorant rescue.
Yeah, we had a live cormorant rescue on In Lieu of Fun.
Oh my
rescued. Gosh. Yeah. So for the first 11 months of the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, but I was in Cape Cod.
Yes.
And there was a very lovely fall evening. And the tides are really crazy in my part of the Cape, but 14 feet. And there is this little bay that we walk down to and walk around. And I was walking and I was like, I hear something. It was pitch black. There was no moon. It was a new moon. And I turned on my flashlight, my phone, and there was this cormorant, on the beach, on this little stretch of sand. And he was limping around in a circle. And I was like, oh no. And so like I kind of scooped him up in my jacket and I brought him home with me and I put him in a box and he fell asleep in this little box. And I took him to a wildlife rescue the next day. And but it turned out he had a broken leg. I don't know how it happened, but like anyway, so it was like crazy. He bit the crap
Wow.
out of me.
I was going to say they don't mess around. Those things are
Yeah.
fierce.
And they're little. They have like a little tooth on.
I was going to say the hook on the end of the beak is.
It was
now
not
you
a
know all
joke.
about
It
it.
was like at my face, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Easy,
yeah.
guy." But yeah. But Ben, show us your shoe bill. Your shoe bill.
So
shirt.
we're going to get to the shoe bill later in the show. I want to start actually with science bullshit.
Great.
Ooh.
And I think, since we've had you on the show, the amount of science bullshit that has overtaken the news has been just astonishing. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about misinformation, disinformation, and science, and the way a kind of motivated reasoning about COVID has kind of overtaken large parts of the discussion.
Yeah, I mean it's a rich and complicated ecosystem that goes all the way from the primary researchers generating the data through what gets shared on social media with a lot of steps along the way. And it's actually I wrote something about this. This it came out at the start of the year. It was actually we wrote it before COVID, and then sort of didn't get around to doing anything with it, and then kept getting harassed by the publisher to send it in, and so we finally sent it in. And
what is it called?
It's called Misinformation in and About Science, and it's in PNAS. And there we put in some mention of COVID just because it was kind of happening, but it was something we'd been working on beforehand. And it's the aim is to try to draw out some of the parallels between the sorts of misinformation that we talk about in society and the sort of and what happens in the scientific ecosystem. But in general, I think you sort of think about there are a whole suite of problems in the way that science is actually operating that are coming from a couple of places. There's all the stuff around the replication crisis that we've all heard about and read about. We can come back and talk about that because I have thoughts there. Then there's the whole fact that, of course, scientists aren't these sort of. Philip Kitcher has this great phrase. He says, we sort of imagine scientists as being epistemically pure. But we're just trying to find the truth, but we're all epistemically sullied. We all have incentives that are out there that we're responding to. There's certain things we have to do, among other things, to keep our jobs or to get our next job or whatever the case may be. And so people are responding. Basically, the way I think about it is these norms and institutions of science. And they may be brick and mortar. They may be sort of norms like, what are credit attribution norms or priority rule stuff or whatever. These give rise to incentives for individual scientists to make certain choices about the sort of research and publication strategies they have. Scientists respond to those incentives being, relatively reasonable, relatively rational actors, and make their choices about what am I going to study, what results am I going to report, et cetera. How am I going to frame them? And then that, of course, leads to so those decisions then are used to sort of interrogate nature and we find certain things and we don't find others. And so our knowledge is somehow, and the knowledge that we have about the world then comes out of that whole process. And so there's this kind of connection between the norms and institutions that evolve sort of happenstance out of, culturally evolved happenstance out of the way that people were doing science in Western Europe 300 years ago, or doing natural philosophy in Western Europe 300 years ago, linking up to the things that we believe to be true about the world today. And so there's a lot of room in that process for things to go wrong. It works amazingly well, considering. And this is why we, in less than a year, have this vaccine that is basically keeping people out of the hospital, despite massive evolutionary change in the virus and so forth. But there's also, it also gives rise to things like the replication crisis. So sort of on the science side, there's all of that going on, and then that gets filtered through a whole bunch of other layers. Just to kind of pick one thread, you get the university. You have this research being done at universities. University press offices then are charged with promoting this, both to gain the attention of donors, but also to justify their own existence to state legislatures and the likes. University press offices then take this research and try to make it look as enticing as possible to popular news.
If you're lucky enough to have a functioning university press office.
Lucky enough to have a functioning university press office. And functioning is, the big issue is, what is the function, right? And so what happens is that introduces a ton of hype. Scientists have kind of all agreed that they can wink and nod and tell whatever bullshit they want to the university press office. And so, you're not going to get away in Cell saying that, your thing that inhibits cell growth in a mouse spleen is a cure for cancer, but you can tell that to the university press office, and they'll say, such and such researchers cure cancer. And then that, of course, those get pumped into the media ecosystem in a lot of different ways. A lot of it's sort of just very loosely rewritten by media under increasing pressure to generate a high volume of stories without paying anybody serious full-time salaries to do science reporting. And one thing that people have found is that a large fraction of the bullshit that appears in popular articles in New York Times or anywhere else, those kinds of venues, it was introduced at the university press office level, which is really discouraging. And so that's that's just sort of one of the problems. And then reporters, of course, have their own interest in amplifying these stories. So in our book, we say, everyone knows that correlation isn't causation, but it doesn't sell newspapers either, right? And so you have this, no one's going to say, oh, scientists find that, there's a R squared value of 0.13 between exercise and prostate cancer. And that shift everybody's belief by about this much. Instead, they're going to say, do this one thing to avoid prostate cancer, right. and so on. And so that so by the time even you get to the mainstream media presentation of scientific results, they've already been biased in this whole host of ways. Then you hit social media, and you hit all of the other motivated reasoning, and you hit all the politicization around science, and that we see around COVID or climate change or anything else. And you throw in all the bad actors that are trying to, using these strategies that are described as agnotogenesis, creating doubt on purpose. So this is your, basically trying to create doubt in order to stave off regulation. And so obviously we've seen that with big tobacco, big oil. Now we're seeing it heavily around COVID, right? So you kind of throw all of this stuff into the mix and add a heavy dose of human psychology and confirmation bias and motivated reasoning and everything else. And by the time you have people consuming information about the world and then passing that on through social media, where we all are the editors and things don't even have to go through reasonable editors anymore, we're quite far off from the state of nature that we thought we were interrogating with scientific process.
All right, so that's fascinating, and it's causing me to sort of imagine a bullshit pie chart where you say the pie chart depicts only the bad information that the consumer ingests. Okay. And it's divided up into wedges composed of the sources of the bad information. Yeah. So you've identified a whole bunch of a bunch of sources, but not sort of the percentages of the pie that they occupy. So if we're describing the bullshit pie, what percentage of it do you think is university press offices distortion? What percentage of it is crazy people, because they hate Joe Biden, promoting ivermectin, right? What percentage of it is
Yeah.
is corporate denialism of the climate change
Right.
variety?
So it depends. It depends what level we're talking about. So if the percentages are going to be different if you're looking in the New York Times versus you're looking on Facebook at your uncle's Facebook feed, right? And so I think so the percentages sort of shift as we. Do you have a particular place that you'd like specific answers instead of me dodging the question again?
Well, I guess what I'm interested, since I'm thinking about COVID,
Yeah.
is if somebody is highly resistant to what you and I would understand as COVID best practices, whether it's getting vaccinated or wearing masks in certain situations, or not licking people's faces, whatever the I guess I'm interested in what your, and granted this is impressionistic, what your sense of the likelihood that is distortions of real scientific papers that are, or whether that's, an information operation that's likely what are the probabilities, or is it just such a melange of all of these things that you actually can't tell at the end of the day?
Well, one of my big fears around this, and we almost wrote a book on this, is made up stats that people just kind of pull stats out of the air and then quote them, and then they get a life of their own. So I'm really reluctant to say, oh yeah, it's 47% information operation and 33%. I'm afraid that would take off and go for a run on its own. But I think that if we're looking at the Facebook feeds that have convinced people to do things that you and I would think were incautious with respect to COVID, I think a lot of it is, just to put some approximate numbers out there, half or more is just the consequences of political polarization within the United States, and the association of certain views with more than half with certain views with sort of tribal identity, so to speak, right? Now, the place that gets a little bit more complicated is you can ask, well, why are those things associated with particular tribal identities? And there you have more heavy. So in terms of what's actively pushing this is largely this politicization. But why? If you told me sort of in 2019, oh yeah, we're going to have a fucking terrible pandemic. Am I allowed to say that on here? I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Don't worry.
And
we wouldn't have made it through 575 episodes if we weren't allowed to swear. Trust me.
So so we wouldn't have. If you told me we're going to have a terrible pandemic, and one political party is going to insist that people should be wearing masks, and the other is going to be insisting that they should take ivermectin. Do you want to bet on which is which, and how much do you, at 2-1, and how much do you want to bet? I wouldn't have put a lot of money down, right? So that was, somewhat happenstance the way that those things got aligned. It's some of it. It's not such a big surprise that one party may be more in favor of allowing the market to take care of healthcare things it was never designed to, and the other party may be more in favor of government interventions that some would see as restriction of freedom. And you might be able to predict that in advance. But an awful lot of this has been sort of created opportunistically as we go along. And it's been created by politicians that have seen opportunities for it. It's definitely been created by foreign disinformation operations. I suspect that those are not a huge contribution to what's going on, but they're definitely there. We can see them, we can track them. We study them at the Center for the Informed Public here at the University of Washington. They're definitely political and definitely commercial interests that are heavily involved. Those kind of the lines blur there between commercial interests and political interests. But we have Koch brother funded think tanks that are actually, still forming anew to promote an anti-interventionist worldview. And now, to some extent, and part of it, it's horrifying to me, is a lot of this has gone sort of in the direction of, virulent anti-vax propaganda. And so one of the latest fronts for this battle is anti-vax propaganda in Africa. So the Brownstone Institute, for example.
It reminds me a lot. Not to reduce it, but it reminds me a lot about the early HIV prevention. Around like not anti. Of course, it wasn't anti-vax, but it was anti-condom usage, and the kind of and the ideas of what condoms would do to you if you use them, and like all of these types of crazy. I mean, and that was like late 90s, early 2000s. Right. I mean, I remember actually doing this is going to date me, not that I need to on this show, but because everyone knows how old I am. But I do remember writing a Model UN resolution about this type of thing, and kind of being about spreading proper information about condom distribution and things like that. But anyway, so one of the things that I have that we've mentioned briefly, but I saw that you had mentioned also on your Twitter account and at various points in the past couple of months, was just kind of where the blame falls with social media. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a super interesting question. One, because of kind of exactly where you place kind of the University of Washington's work in this. Kate Starbird has done insanely amazing work in this area. And she was doing it at the Stanford Cyber Center before that. And all of this is fantastic. I mean, but increasingly, as I'm looking at a lot of this stuff, and I pull back to kind of the theory, I love that you introduced this idea of the university press offices spreading disinformation, or the idea that this is that there are various moments of augmentation or various moments of misinformation. And I'm going to actually focus on the journalist aspect, not to throw my fellow journalists under the bus, but I kind of think that one of the things that you talk about, and you focus on science, and this idea, but there's the Gelman amnesia, which is this idea that if you know about something, you immediately are the New York Times fucked up this story a million times over. But let me tell you that as both a scientist and a journalist and a lawyer, that I watch them do this all the time. And so I take all of my news with a huge grain of salt. But that is to say that basically that a lot of the same, and this is actually something that I'm increasingly trying to, I'm writing a paper about, and I have it coming out soon, but the same metrics that we've been talking about for clicks for social media, and the advantage of having a salacious headline or some type of is the exact same incentive structure that our media now relies on.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, so
there's nothing to stop them from taking up and giving to their fact checkers that the university press office said this, and so it's true. And that's and having gone through multiple fact checking processes as a journalist, I can tell you that's all you need.
Right.
So
So I mean, we talk about this in the book a bit, and I think that's completely right. I mean, lately my focus has really been on social media and the way that social media creates dynamics of information flow that we don't understand and we don't know how to control, and that are kept deliberately opaque from us by the algorithmic forces that be, and the complete control of the information that the companies have. But in the book we write more about how there is this fundamental change once you go to click-based revenue. So the shift from subscription-based revenue, and I consider old school advertising being subscription-based as well, because your subscription-based determines your ad rates. So in the past, you used to form a long-term relationship with a news source, the New York Times, something like that. And so a
Yeah.
story in the New York Times was not necessarily competing tooth and nail for your attention the way that they are now. And so now, instead I pull out my iPhone in the morning and I get, Apple News on here, and I have a reasonable, analysis of Biden's latest policy plan, and then below it, and literally, like somebody got a butt job, and there's 9 cats that look like Disney princesses, and I'm a good person, but I'm not that good of a person. I mean, I'm clicking on the garbage.
Carl,
It's this head-to-head competition across venues. And what we
but
say in
it's
the book
even
is that the unvarnished truth is no longer good enough.
Yeah, try publishing the lawfare in this environment.
Right. Yeah.
It's like you're actually competing. You put out a dense analysis of the law of the interaction of the law of conspiracy with the law of insurrection, and you're competing with the 5 cats that look like hairless cats that look like Vladimir Putin for eyeballs in the morning.
I'm going to say that
exactly right. And
what's that?
I mean,
That's a realistical.
No, I know.
It is. It's probably why I know it is. These all are. I mean, somewhere I've got a screenshot where I've actually got those other 2 things like together up against a analysis of midterm policy changes. And
But can I say
this
is
I mean,
not?
it's probably why I shitpost on Twitter so much, is because
Well, this is. I mean, now you're competing with Scott Shapiro. But I'm just going to say for a second that basically. No, I just really want to say this, that there is I've been, and I don't want to kind of undermine this point that we're that this is a frictionless environment that we're dealing with, as opposed to everything before. But I'm watching the old versions of Sherlock Holmes that are from Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes, or I'm I'm reading through actual physical microfiches, documents, kind of things for a thing that I'm doing, and they're basically all kind of the same. There are these pictures of newsies hawking salacious headlines in the same level of clickbait that they do today, and here's the difference is we are in the privacy of our own homes when we decide to click on the National Enquirer versus having to. I literally do remember I would look at the National Enquirer. I would want to buy the National Enquirer. I would not want to pay the money for the National Enquirer. And you know what the real thing was? I couldn't stand the stare from the clerk at as I checked out of them judging me as I bought the National Enquirer, and so I didn't do it. But now we don't have that anymore.
Well, I think that's right. You're totally right about really garbage journalism. I mean, this goes back into the 19th century. There were, in our course, we talk about these amazing articles. There was a whole series of articles that ran for 2 or 3 years by Kate about.
She's still here.
About the people that lived on the moon that had been discovered with these new telescopes, and they had wings, and they flew around, and they had orgies and all kinds of things. And these were, this was so you get more of this kind of head-to-head competition when you're selling at a newsstand, and so definitely we've seen that. It's just, I think that the click-based advertising takes that to an extreme, and the idea of news aggregators and social media and all this other stuff. But yeah, I mean, it is a problem through and through, and like you say, also just not having the partly there's no social there's no sort of social disapproval around this because we do it in private, and partly there's no social disapproval around this because we don't disapprove of anything anymore. I mean, I'm here talking about oh yeah, I was reading about someone getting a new butt, and I don't even know how many people are on the other end. Well, everyone reads about how somebody got a new butt. Imagine saying that at 85.
But I think the point about the collapsing of platforms into one another is a really important one. So it's not like the volume of bullshit is I mean, the volume of everything is more than it used to be.
Right.
But, we used to have the weekly world news in the supermarket
Right, of
aisle
course.
every time you checked out. And, the alien might endorse Clinton that day,
Yeah.
or it might, right? Like that was like part of the information ecosystem, but it was segregated from
Yeah.
the rest of the information ecosystem. And now the information ecosystem is by its, is highly integrated, and your access to it, which
Much more democratic.
we normally think of in terms of porn, right? Kate's point about buying the National Enquirer is the point that everybody who remembers being a 13-year-old boy above a certain age,
Right.
had and there's even, the great scene in Bananas where Woody Allen, tries to buy porn, and has to collapse it along, with lots of high-minded magazines.
It's like, here's Harper's, The Economist, The New Yorker, and Playboy.
No, it's not Playboy.
I know it's
and
not
and
Playboy.
and
I
the
know.
punchline of the scene is the woman who's checking him out, can't find the price and screams across the room, "How much is screw?" That's but like, but that level of friction with respect to bad information does insulate it from a certain amount of the population who have either like inhibitions about buying it, or are just, they may be titillated by it, but they actually know it's not good for them, and so when they're in the supermarket aisle they don't buy it, right? And so I guess my question
And I think it's also true. Sorry, I'm just going to add on to your question really quickly, which is like, imagine this, and then you have food stamps, and then you have other types of things in which you're supposed to be buying certain types of things, and you're trying to like buy something like a bag of Doritos with food stamps, and like you have to, like, anyways, I'm just like kind of saying that this is like various types of things in like the scrutiny of retail markets, of thinking like if it has to pass by a person, makes it much more of a social dilemma constantly than like any type of like it's not just that the internet like gets rid of it, like self-checkout gets rid of it in
right.
a
No,
way.
look,
So
I think the the point, and we actually studied this at one point in a paper that I worked on for at Brookings. um it's a puppy. um
hi. Oh my
we
gosh, she's cute. She's
She was on the
cute.
floor growling at me, so she was either going to stop barking or I was going to have to pick her up.
Oh, hi. Yeah, she can totally come up here. Hi. You're
so
so cute.
we actually studied the frictionless quality of porn at one point, in a sort
I'm
of
sure you did.
yeah, absolutely. Very aggressively. And but I think the people talk about it less with respect to just bad information. But I
Yeah,
think
no,
the
it's really
point is the
interesting.
same. You don't have to look somebody in the eye and say, "I'm going to read a lot of nonsense tonight."
So
You just do it.
this is fascinating to me because my thought about this was that I was very much more focused on the way that the structure of the market for information or market for attention allowed head-to-head competition. But your point about the friction and the being socially judged and so forth is really interesting to me. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to be throwing a
No,
paper.
no, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah,
There's I am interested though to see how you think that this impacts things like uh so one of the other things that I haven't gotten to bring up, and I'm really desperate to bring up with you, is like I have studied a fair amount the blame causation structure. Bertram Malley at Brown has like who I've talked to, who I went to Brown, but he wasn't there when I was there. But anyways, he's a cognitive scientist. He studied this a lot. Larry Solin at Brooklyn Law School has studied this, but it's basically tracing like how people find blame and like the least cost avoider, and like where they stop their blame structure in terms of like searching back through, like, if you really can't causatively link it to someone, like, if you really can't, like, where you stop to place it. And like, increasingly, what their studies show is that it stops at basically the person, like the structure or the institution that has the most money, or the most ability to pay. And so this is one of the reasons that, like, it's for airplane accidents that are unsubscribed, it like stops at like the airplane. Like, you know, even if they couldn't have done anything to stop the accident. And so similarly, I'm finding that this is like true of social media, which is like, they're just huge corporations with tons and tons of money. And so this is where our blames, but even like, but though you rightly maybe point out that maybe we could just do a better job of having the university press offices put out bulletins. No one wants to place the blame there. Like, obviously.
You got to take a nuanced view of that. I mean, of course, there's going to be a lot of contributors along the way. You know, the social. I mean, I don't think any of this lets. Personally, I don't think that, and you could argue about. We can argue about this. I don't think any of this lets the Facebooks of the world off the hook in the least. So, I mean, the blame absolutely lies in the perversities of human psychology. Otherwise, none of this would work. But these companies are deploying algorithms that that discover and exploit those perversities to the cost, to the detriment of society. And I think that that particularly when they're going out of their way to deter transparency in what they're doing, that's an enormous problem. So, my postdoc that I work with, Joe Buck Coleman, says, look, trying to deal with social media, and the harm that's being done by disinformation and misinformation spreading on social media is kind of like, what if when they've got all the data and won't share it, and when they did share it, they'd actually completely screwed it up, and so they managed to. This is a whole other story, which you probably remember, when the data was
Laura's been on the show, and we've had me personally on the show, and there's Josh Tucker. So
we just happened to send all of the social media researchers in the world on a 3-year wild goose chase. Are bad. And there just happens not to be any information that could be used to regulate us, because they were off doing this, working on this false data set. I mean, I think that what Joe says is, it's like imagine we're trying to deal with global warming, but Exxon was the only one who had a thermometer. I mean, and
well, even better, I imagine that, like, as I've said before on this show, and like specifically to Nate and to Laura Edelson at NYU and to others, like, is basically like, listen, like, there is no such thing as transparency creates accountability. Like, they can't just give you all of this stuff. Like, you can't trust them. That's the whole point. What has to happen is a double check, which is like what Laura's doing in the scraping side of things.
Absolutely.
And then against whatever it is that they're providing. And then when you can do that double check, you have accountability. But it's two levels of transparency that you have to enable. And no one seems to be having this conversation. They think it all is like going to be like, oh, the data companies just give up all their data. And it's like, no.
They've proven to us that we can't trust them to do that, because they, for all practical purposes, had an Excel error in the data they gave us. So
I do think that I think it was an innocent error, but I do think that it
may well
terrible.
have been innocent. It was, I'm reserving judgment. There was bloody convenient whether it was innocent or not, but and I think there are innocent errors in there. I mean, there are innocent errors that you didn't bother to find because it wasn't worth looking very hard. If their bottom line had been at stake, you might have checked those data a little more carefully.
The entire project might have not had the amount of rigor in funding that it had at the outset, and that kind of tailed off at the end, which created some of those errors. So I'm with you 100%. But still, that being said, give them the benefit of the doubt and see what happens. Tony Cava.
Oh, Tony. How are your hummingbirds, Tony?
Oh, wait. And he has a stellar jay that he's been
I
feeding.
know he does. But he's been
Ben,
rescuing hummingbirds the last couple of days.
Ben, you're muted. You're muted, Ben. Sorry, I should have said that instead of just saying your name over and over again.
Before we go to audience questions, including Tony's stellar jay, we got to talk about the Shoebill.
Okay,
because the Shoebill is having a moment on Twitter. People are tweeting Shoebills at me all the time.
Who knew?
You know something about Shoebills.
I got really kind of hooked on Shoebills a few years back, because for the same reasons I suspect that a lot of us are. Still never seen one live.
What's that? They're crazy looking. They're
crazy looking. They're dinosaurs. They're giant. They are very judgmental in terms of the expressions that they put on their faces, which I think
they bow to you if you bow to them.
They bow. I mean, they're one.
Why do they do that?
They do not. Do they really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Really?
That's where Buckbeak the hippogriff comes from.
Oh, yeah, really?
I do think Buckbeak is a Shoebill. I agree.
Yeah.
Oh, Ben, is this face not just is that an actual face that Shoebills make that's unnatural? I thought that was just like a dark-winged duck type of
No. They look like this.
They look like that.
So here's my question, and it's really precise and simple. And what the fuck, Shoebills, man?
Okay, I'm trying to find this. I wrote this. I was really into Shoebills when I was writing the second edition of this book. And while I'm talking to you, hopefully I can find the pictures of it. But I put a little story of Shoebills in here because I always like to get my favorite critters into. So this is my evolution textbook, not pitching it, just acknowledging where it's coming.
We're pitching it, though.
I'm going to now buy your evolution.
No, don't do that. Okay, yeah. So here's the Shoebills. They're in there. You can see. Oh, damn it! There goes the microphone.
Is that a blue heron?
Here's a blue heron. Okay, so the whole story behind all of this is a pretty cool story, which is that we thought for a long time that Shoebills were modified herons. They were most closely related to herons.
And the whole name Shoebill stork, right, is wrong. It has nothing to do with a stork.
So, right, some people thought they were storks as well. What's kind of fun is that John Gould, who's a very famous ornithologist, kind of second to Audubon perhaps, described the Shoebill in 1851 and said that it was a kind of pelican. And ever since, birders have kind of been like, WTF, like what a moron, until they did the genetics. And it turns
out, genetics? Oh, okay. I was going to ask if it was some type of fetal, if it was
Shoebills are pelicans.
And, they really are?
Yeah. Well,
I thought they were isolates.
They're they're not. Yeah, they're not pelicans because pelicans are their own group, but pelicans are their closest relatives.
Oh. I didn't know that herons were derivative of storks.
Well, they're. I mean, kind of.
I paid better attention when my grandparents were talking to me.
Anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's just this wonderful story about John Gould saying, yeah, they're pelicans, and everyone's saying, boy, he got a lot of things right, but boy, did he screw that up. And then we've recently discovered, in fact, that they are most closely related to pelicans, and it kind of makes sense when you look at them and some of their behaviors. And
so, what do they eat? Like when they eat, do they eat Yeah, tell me about this.
They're ferocious hunters.
They eat these big ass eels in the.
Really?
Yeah, and they just
and they eat them whole.
Yeah, they just grab them and then they gobble, and there they go.
But herons, there's all these pictures recently of herons stabbing to death gophers and rats and
when I was in grad school, the blue herons used to eat. There were enormous ground squirrels in California that are the size of a woodchuck basically, and the herons would get these things and they just throw their neck up, and the ground squirrel's 4 times the size of the heron's neck. Gets stuck halfway down and it's still kind of kicking a bit, and then goes the rest of the way down. It was wild.
Can I ask a weird question? So why owls eat voles and they kick up pellets, And they and the pellets that you can then as I did many a time and have since done
Right.
because I'm a weirdo, find the pellets and then dissect them, and you can put together a whole skeleton of a vole from this
Right.
pellet thing. But why don't herons and shoebills do that if they're eating these giant rodents whole?
It's a great question. I don't know. I suspect they probably do spit that stuff back out.
Yeah.
I suspect.
Really?
Someone should correct me. I can tell you, instead of answering that, I'm going to tell you something super cool about grebes, which is so if y'all should listen.
I'm here for it.
Y'all should listen to Bird Note because I learned about this from Bird Note. But so grebes are amazing. Grebes eat all kinds of super spiny fish and crayfish and things like that. Just another aquatic predator like this. And actually, the things they eat would perforate their intestine if they let it go all the way through. So what grebes do is they eat their own feathers, and in fact they feed their feathers to their offspring as well, so that the babies they feed their own feathers to the babies. I've watched them do this.
Do they line their intestines?
It makes a plug at the bottom of the stomach. Then the stomach acid, sort of the juice of everything goes down through the bones and crayfish shells and things get caught in the plug, which they then cough up. The really fun thing about this is that the first some early I believe they were Spanish explorers described this behavior in I think the 16th century, and they said that there was some kind of religious allegory here. I can't remember what it was, but the grebe, they explain, is a bird that sole source of sustenance is its own feathers. And
wow.
And you think, and so
which is partly right. The grebe is not a perpetual motion machine.
They say
actually.
They
it's
say
got a Matrix vibe there.
You say God, that's stupid, and then I turn around and say to you, well, have you ever seen a tree? Where the hell does all that wood come from?
Right.
So it's actually not such a stupid idea.
Wow! What an amazing kind of observation that is.
Anyway, it's all y'all should seriously listen to Bird Note. It's all on Bird Note, which is
cool. I'm
all right. So I want to go back to an important shoebill question.
Yes.
I saw a video about shoebill parenting that was very upsetting.
Yes.
Because according to this video, shoebill has generally 2 chicks.
Right.
And
should the tip off with pelicans, by the way. Anyway, keep going.
And basically, they've got really Roman attitude toward the chicks. The stronger one, the mama shoebill kind of figures out which is the stronger one, and then will only feed the stronger one.
That's right. And pelicans do the same thing, as it turns out. And I'm also quite fond of pelicans, and it definitely took me a while. The pelicans, I think shoebills do this some too. They help the weaker one off this moral coil.
And do they feed it to the stronger one?
Stop it, Ben!
Because I have to say I'm upset by this. I've
gone through this phase with both pelicans and shoebills of coming to acceptance, being angry at them for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
And then kind of coming to acceptance of all of that. My thing, I really loved pelicans, and then when I every time I looked at one and it was a what do you call an individual that killed a sibling? It's not a siblicide, it's a
fratricide.
Fratricide. But
even if it's a siblicide. It's a fratricide.
Anyway, a simplicidist, or that's they're all.
I don't think there's a gender neutral word for it. Hi, Michael.
Hi, friends.
Michael?
The floor is yours, sir.
Wow. It was very interesting. I think something you talked about, Kate, really resonated with me about the Weekly World News. While you talking about the National Enquirer, the Weekly World News, I used to see them in the checkout line all the time.
And were you inhibited about buying them?
I never bought them, but part of the appeal was exactly what you all said, right? Was the knowledge that someone out there believes this horse shit. The best one I remember was there was this picture of a factory belching smoke, and someone had done sort of artwork over it of like a face, like a demonic face, and the headline was "Satan escapes from hell." And it just stuck with me. Like, I never wanted to own it, but like it was fantastic to watch it, and the knowledge that someone out there might believe it was why it was appealing. And now that you don't really see that stuff anymore.
Now you do see it. You just don't have to buy it.
Well, you don't see it at the grocery store.
Every day in your Twitter feed. You see it when you sign into Facebook, and you don't distinguish between it and your news.
Well, I'm very careful about curating my Twitter feed, but yes, you're absolutely right. You definitely don't see it at the grocery store anymore, because you can no longer sell it at the grocery store for the reasons that you all outlined. I guess this is sort of related to my question, though, which is that, kind of coming back to this idea of, you've talked a lot, Carl, in your book and on Twitter. I love following your Twitter feed, by the way. Please keep shit posting. I love it. Okay. It's better than almost anything else I read on Twitter.
I'm feeling guilty about last night's shit post today.
Well, I understand. I mean, I also sympathize with the regret. Fortunately, nobody follows me, so nobody ever sees my shit posts, and I delete them. You have a lot of advice for people, about how to avoid bullshit, both in your book and on your Twitter feed, but a lot of it seems to implicitly assume that the reader wants to see through the bullshit.
Yeah, right.
I think one of the challenges that I have in my life is encountering people who don't necessarily want to, or at least don't want to yet. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, what are your advice or tactics or strategies you've found, or anything that would help kind of dealing with people, sort of bringing them to the idea that maybe they should be aware that there is bullshit, and that maybe do you have any sort of suggestions for how to do that for people who kind of are swimming in it and don't know it?
Yeah,
or do know it and like it?
It's really hard. I mean, I think it's a great question, and I don't, and it's such a great question, I don't have a good answer. When it comes to something like COVID, I think a lot of people do want to keep themselves and their families safe and do the right things and so on. And so, trying to find that common ground is usually where I would turn in terms of answering, trying to do something like that. For example, talking about, if I'm talking to people who are vaccine hesitant, instead of saying, God, you're such a moron not to believe science. Science is amazing. I mean, you talk about how hard it is to figure out what to do to keep your family safe, and about the trade-offs and that kind of stuff. And then let them ask the questions about the science, and then you can answer it when asked, But I think it's finding, and this is a very imperfect answer, but it's recognizing that there are places that people do want to know the truth about things, and then finding the common ground with them and exploring that with them. But that's an art that I don't have a lot of skill at, and I don't have any better advice than that.
David H., the floor is yours.
I asked two questions. One is like a public service announcement. Which one am I asking?
You choose. You can even do both.
Okay.
If you make it brief, because we're running out of time.
I know. All right. What I want to know about is your bird photography, which you post on Twitter. I think your bird photography is excellent, and I'm curious about how much time you spend on it, where you take all those photos, and then what you do with them. You must have millions of photos. And then there was another question, which was about since you've posted several times about COVID not evolving to be less virulent necessarily, and you've posted a lot about that on Twitter, so that can be answered by people who look at your Twitter feed.
Yeah. So birds, I started doing more bird photography when COVID hit, because it was like one thing I actually could do. And so, since COVID started, I tried to spend at least an hour every day just out of the house, walking and taking pictures. And I always used to wonder how good bird photographers got so many amazing pictures of wild things happening, and just wow, they saw this, or they were in this place while the snow was falling, or how does that happen? It turns out the answer is you actually just go outside with your camera. And the more you do that, the more likely you are to be in the right place at the right time. And it's not that definitely there are people with enormous skill at getting themselves into right places and so on. But the most important thing is just spending more time. So I spend, probably 6-8 hours a week on a normal week when I'm supposed to be working, taking pictures, and a lot more when I go on vacation. Of course, might be 6 hours a day on vacation or 8 hours a day. And what do I do with them? I mean, I've got 100,000 pictures on an external hard drive that I don't do anything with. I post them to Twitter, and that's about
That's your retirement, Carl.
Exactly.
You're entitled to those pictures. They will be completely.
Well, hopefully I'll get better and better. And besides the new technology, I mean, no one's going to want to look at 2D photos in my retirement. I mean, come on.
All right, and viruses and virulence,
virulence, I mean, there's a lot of bullshit going around about how viruses are going to naturally evolve to be less virulent, and that's a crock of shit based on some old stuff that
everything that we know about evolution
that was wrong. And the logic was it doesn't help the virus to kill its host, so they'll evolve to become less virulent. It's wrong for a million reasons that I've written around a lot on Twitter, and we can move on to the next question.
Tony Kava, you get the last question today.
Tony, great to see you.
Tony, so good to see you.
It's great to see you. Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent, Carl. It's great to see you again.
Likewise.
One thing about bird photography, and this made me feel about bird photographers like Ben feels about storks, is that a lot of the photos are staged. I mean, people make props. You make a branch and you hide some seed on it, and that allows you to just set your camera up and just, wait for the bird to come.
That's not cheating, though.
That's not cheating.
That's totally legit.
What do you think the National Geographic photographers did? They would sit for hours with something in a trap, staring at it.
It's no more cheating than feeding your weakest child to your most stronger child. Right?
Little less cheating.
There's a really strong norm against doing this with, say, owls, where baiting owls is really, really not okay. It depends a lot on our relationship with them. I do have personal relationships with some of the crows that I photograph. In the sense, personal relationship, I mean, I give them food and they recognize me.
Right. That's my relationship with blue jays.
So yeah, exactly, like your relationship with blue jays. But in general, I don't, with the exception of that, if you call that staging, I mean, I usually don't feed them when I'm taking their pictures, but they do come find me. Right. I don't stage, but the thing I do like to do in the photographs, I do think that birding is sort of it's a reciprocal interaction. It's not just you watching something passive. The bird is interacting with you as well. Yeah. And so, if you look at my photos, I think one thing that's really characteristic of the shots I take is that there's almost always eye contact between the bird and I. And because I want to really capture the fact that it's two living creatures interacting with each other.
So that kind of brings me to my question, if I may, and that's about kind of interesting animal bird behavior during this cold weather that we're experiencing up here. And, for instance, the Stellar Jays they just went AOL for 4 or 5 days. And in fact, Ichiban and Hachikun just showed up this morning.
Oh, yeah.
First time I'd seen them in a week. And then I think you might have seen the picture I posted of this hummingbird that's just been hanging out at midnight.
That was amazing.
On my Christmas lights. And he's survived every morning. But
of course,
I'd never seen somebody out, hummingbird out and about in the dark.
The photos with the lights were remarkable, and it definitely was pulling heat off of those, so it was really cool.
Oh, absolutely. So I was just wondering if maybe you could talk about some interesting animal bird behavior you've seen or know about in cold weather, and maybe you could compare it to the driving ability of Seattle drivers.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think the birds. I think So Tony is referring to the fact that I, as a Michigander, find Seattle snow driving to be frustrating, to say the least. It's
I'm from Rochester, New York, so I find everyone's snow driving to be completely bonkers, in my opinion.
Exactly. So anyway, snow stuff. I mean, I don't know that much about bird behavior in the cold. One thing that's really interesting is I've noticed that foraging behavior changes, and based on just the based on snow cover, right? And so. Just to give you an observation from this latest cold snap, we've got a lot of snow in Seattle right now, which is relatively unusual. Is that the seagulls are often, seagulls are occasionally information parasites on crows. They watch where crows are aggregating, and then they.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Really?
and then they go there, and so I've seen more information parasitism of crows in the last 3 days by seagulls than I had, in the previous 6 months. And it's because
maybe
food's hard to
seagulls
find.
are social media and crows are journalism.
Yeah, exactly. So, so this is that's one little interesting observation. It's probably a lot harder to find food with everything covered. The crows know what the hell they're doing, and the seagulls are, now moving in on crows every single time that they see an aggregation of a half dozen crows somewhere.
We are gonna leave it there. Be a crow, not a seagull, people. And if you are a seagull, consider your life choices and repent.
Absolutely.
I love having you on. Thank you so much for coming
Carl
on.
Bergstrom, you're a great American. It's great to have you back. We will be back tomorrow, 22 hours and 58 minutes from now. Do we know who the guest is tomorrow?
No, but it's going to be awesome. I think I have a pretty good idea of who it's going to be. It's going to be awesome.
I'm excited about it. And I know I see you in the audience, Reverend Dr. Hillary Livingston, and I have not forgotten that you owe us a Where's the Lie.
True.
So if you want to do that tomorrow or Thursday, just let us know. Anyway, all of that will be 22 hours and 58 minutes from now. And until then, KK?
We don't have fun anymore, but we do know that shoebills are officially derivative of pelicans, and we still don't know why they don't cough up pellets.
No, I'll look into that.
But I'm going to look into that. Yeah. That's like a thing that I'm going to like. This is the best part of the internet, is I can now dig that.
Absolutely. Thanks, you guys. That was super fun. It was always a pleasure.
You're the best.
Great to see you.
Hi to your dog for us.
I will do.